What kind of considerations need to be made or are being made when these studies become decentralized? Is that something you guys have thought about?
Yeah, I mean,
So
I wanna ask Jelani his thoughts on all of that, but I just want to say the technical side of it, right? I'm not going to quote solidity here, but basically, you can offer people multiple different ways to interact through DeSci for, in particular, funding research, as an example, right? You want to fund research. Okay, I have lots of money and I want to go and fund something I care about. My daughter has a rare disease and I want to fund research in that. I'm going to put some money up and I want someone to come and fund someone come take that money and do some research. Now, that person needs to have good credentials, otherwise, I don't want to give them my money, right? They need to have verified identity from being at a certain university or trained in a certain way. Do I need to know that person's identity? Well, most people would say, yes, I'd like to know that person's identity because it's important for the research and I'm giving them money to do so. Now, what if that wasn't about your daughter's rare disease, but that was about, I don't know, something to do with something that big pharma is pushing and you're anti that, right? So you go and research the antithesis of what big pharma is currently pushing. Now, again, you want the person you're giving money to have good credentials, but are they going to want to reveal their identity? You probably not, right? Because it's a dangerous thing to do. So, how do I then interact with that person anonymously, but while still having confidence? There are ways. ZK proofs is something that DeSci is going to use incredibly well. Um, but aside from that, it kind of all boils down to the individual need and the confidence required for that individual need in this particular situation in DeSci, in my opinion, because some people won't need that extra level of verification. Some people will, and some people won't be able to give it, and some people will. So that's just kind of like the optionality there. But in terms of like how important it is for science, I think Jelani's far better suited to answer that.
yeah, so this is where DeSci comes right against real world regulation. So in the real scientific biomedical space, there are regulatory bodies and regulatory constitutions that have to be followed in terms of making sure that patients and individuals have their privacy and their data is private. So you can't track back where this data comes from to the individual person. And so B-side space as a whole is cognizant of it because many of the builders who are in this space are actual scientists of various disciplines of various forms, and we have been trained and almost drilled into that you have to have these considerations. So HIPAA and GDPR are two of the main bodies, constitutional regulations that make it that enforce this notion that things have to remain private. And so one of the key ways that this is being done is that actual data, so the data itself is not necessarily being uploaded on the blockchain. Let's say, for example, you yourself you have a medical history. Everybody has a medical history. Well, if you want to participate in a DeSci and centralized clinical trial, well, your medical data does not need to be put onto the blockchain for all to see, right? The commit of your medical data is not that's not what's going to happen, right? So you'll have hashes that relate back to that data without actually de-identifying that data. And so most of the frameworks, Weave Chain is one, IPFS use these frameworks to kind of bring this together. So there's still paramount um, prioritization of privacy as it comes to medical data and scientific data. But what it does is it allows for ease of access for people to get the information without identifying the person. Now, with that being said, there are other instances where that is not the case, right? So, for example, there are a lot of entities that have popped up that are doing things like 23andMe and Ancestry, where you can get your genetics sequenced and then find out a whole bunch of stuff about yourself, your phylogenetics, your ancestry, your predisposition to certain medical conditions. And those, by virtue, are extremely public. But as Josh mentioned, oftentimes what happens in these scenarios, so Genomes DAO is a good example of this. Genomes DAO and Encryption are two entities that do this in a Web3 infrastructure. But the ownership of that data remains solely within the hands of the recipient, of the person who donated it, right? So as Josh said, if a third party genetic testing or a third party pharmaceutical industry wants access to your genetics, they have to come to you and you have to bequeath unto them that information or access to that genetic code. So on one end, there is, if it's not down to the individual, then it's not committed to the blockchain and remains private. On the other end, if it can be brought down to the individual, but you have to give the consent to that. So again, just to circle back, prioritization of privacy of medical information is paramount, at least so far as I have seen in the DeSci space. So that's been very good.
Yeah, that's
And it
one.
speaks to, I just want to bring out one thing. So it speaks to the fact that, DeFi and DeSci are going to intermingle with each other, but DeSci is going to have to deal with two regulatory entities or two regulatory spaces. There's going to be the financial space, so the three-letter financial entities, but there's also going to be the scientific and privacy, so the FDAs, the WHOs, all these entities that regulate the governing medical bodies. We're actually going to have to deal with two regulatory bodies, and so that's something that to keep in mind. And the HIPAA and the GDPR considerations are there, but I think there's a lot more conversations that need to be had in terms of what else we have to deal with in this space. I don't think we quite understand it fully yet.